What if I told you that there is an architect out there who doesn't even like to call himself an architect? His designs are so out there and abstract that sometimes they don't even get built. But due to the forward thinking of his creations, back in 2008, he was named as one of the world's most influential people.
I'm very interested in kind of architecture that actually is creating new kinds of facilities and new kinds of necessities that in certain ways are becoming too big for our cities.
Today we are talking about Rem Koolhaas, the 77-year-old visionary who's created some of the most interesting and iconic buildings on the planet. This is a guy who by some accounts is the world's most controversial architect, largely because from when he first got started through today, he continues to push boundaries with his designs and think about buildings in a way unlike anybody else. In today's episode, we are going to talk about the history of Rem Koolhaas. We will look at some of his most known work around the world. And last, we are going to get into 10 lessons that can be learned from this influential guy. Rem was born November 17th, 1944 in Rotterdam, Netherlands, which is a port city in South Holland. And it's kind of fitting for him to grow up here because Rotterdam is definitely now known for super interesting, bold, modern, and sometimes downright weird architecture. Right out of school at the age of 19, Rem actually became a journalist, but that didn't last long. He started studying architecture a few years later at the Architectural Association School of Architecture in London, and then Rem followed up these studies in London at several schools in New York, and by 1975 he founded his architectural firm called OMA, which stands for the Office for Metropolitan Architecture. Nowadays, after being in business for almost 50 years, Rem has completed exactly 100 projects according to his company's website, and back in 2000 he was proudly awarded the Pritzker Architecture Prize at the age of 56. This prize is prestigious and is meant to honor architects whose built work demonstrates talent, vision, and commitment, and has produced consistent and significant contributions to humanity through the art of architecture. Nowadays, Rem's company OMA employs hundreds of architects with branches in Australia, Doha, Rotterdam, New York, and Hong Kong. He has them organized, of course, in an interesting way on the website. They've sorted it by region, so you can see here AU is for people who work in Australia, CA is for people who work in Canada. It's a cool visual. It kind of looks like the periodic table of elements. What's unique about Rem's work is that instead of him just taking on any job that's going to pay the bills like normal people might do, he has always been more conceptual and theoretical, which means that oftentimes his designs don't even get built.
For me, it's not so much good architecture, but it's architecture that helps to redefine where we stand.
Another thing that Rem is known for is the fact that his style is actually pretty inconsistent. Each project serves the local landscape and community, so they use materials that are closely available. So while he has consistently pushed the boundaries in terms of the looks of his builds, they definitely don't all look the same, which just makes it hard to be out there in the world and see a unique building and say, oh yeah, that's definitely a Rem Koolhaas build. Rem is known to have traveled thousands and thousands of miles over his career seeking out projects and commissions that will align with his vision and his values. So I think it's time that we look at some of his most well-known work together. All right, so we're just gonna flip through my favorites, and remember guys, he has done a ton of work over the course of his career and a lot of it is very cool, so this was not easy for me to pick my favorites, but on each one we'll of course look at the description according to Rem's website. We'll talk about where the building is located and when it was completed. And then last, of course, we'll look at some photos together. So this first one here is the Shenzhen Stock Exchange. This place is located in Shenzhen, China, and it was completed in 2013. The description says that the Shenzhen Stock Exchange is conceived as a physical materialization of the virtual stock market. So as we all know, typically the base of a building anchors the structure and connects it to the ground. But in this building, the base is lifted up kind of with the same euphoria that's supposed to drive the stock market. This is just like a regular looking skyscraper, but the base of the building is literally elevated above the ground. It is very cool looking both at daytime and at nighttime. I love this image here that kind of compares it to a bunch of other prominent buildings that were built all over the world where the base is on the ground, which is what you normally see. Flipping through the photos, this place is very cool. It's definitely very unique, and it even has kind of like a garden area on the top of that base level that's floating, which I love. All right, so the next one that we have up on the list, this one isn't going to seem all all that exciting at first, but I put it on the list for a reason. It's called the Netherlands Dance Theater. So this project was completed in 1987, and it is known to be the first major creation that Rem Koolhaas has ever done. The theater was a part of a larger complex, so it was shared with a concert hall and a hotel that was designed by somebody else. You can see some photos of it here, so there's where this thing is kind of sandwiched in between the other buildings within the complex. I put this in here for two reasons. One, it's pretty cool that this was Rem's first work, so I wanted to share that with you guys. But two, I stumbled across a story that I was not aware of, and that is that this complex was actually torn down in 2015. I dug up some old records and I did find some images of the teardown part of the process. Apparently Rem was really involved in that, and he visited often, and he took a ton of photos to document what was happening during demolition. But yeah, I guess there was a developer who had a different vision for this whole site, and so unfortunately Rem's first piece of work had to go down with the rest of it. All right, let's get away from that depressing story and look at Casa de Musica. So this building is one that I would consider probably one of his most iconic pieces of work. The structure is located in Portugal, and it was completed in 2005. Looking at the photos here, you'll see that it's definitely a unique shape from the outside, but it's totally functional and pretty normal looking from the inside. That grand auditorium section that you see is supposed to be conceived as a mass that's hollowed out from end to end from the solid form of the building. And then there's flexible space kind of all around that area with stuff like rehearsal rooms and recording studios, an educational area, a restaurant, bars, all that stuff. Next up, we've got the Seattle Central Library. This is another pretty fun looking structure. So this one, of course, is in Seattle. It was completed in 2004. And the best way to describe what they were looking to do here is they say that OMA's ambition is to redefine the library as an institution no longer exclusively dedicated to the book, but rather as an information store where all potent forms of media, new and old, are presented equally and legibly. So you can see how this is broken up into kind of different quarters. You've got parking on the bottom, then staff, then assembly, then books, then the headquarters. Everything's kind of stacked on top of each other. There is a ton of natural light that dumps into this space, but a lot of very cool shadows because of the use of all that steel in the structure. They say there's 6,200 bookcases, which house 780,000 books in here. All right, and next up on our list, we have De Rotterdam. So this one is very cool. This is definitely another one that's up there on the list of what Rem is most known for. This kind of skyscraper complex thing is conceived as a vertical city. There's 3 interconnected mixed-use towers accommodating offices, apartments, a hotel, conference facilities, shops, restaurants, and cafes. The place is obviously located in the Netherlands. It was completed back in 2013. And you can see in these images that the shape and scale of these buildings are very unique and very interesting, and collectively they do kind of resemble a small city in and of itself, even though it's, I guess, technically just one building. The towers reach 150 meters high, and this building is actually the largest building in all of the Netherlands. All right, and just 2 more we need to look at. Next one is the CMG Quinhai Global Trade Center. So this is actually one of the projects that's in construction right now, so I had to show you guys kind of what's to come for the firm. This place will be in Shenzhen, China, and it started in 2016, but the construction is still ongoing. I really like how there's these 2 separate skyscrapers that are kind of staggered up, and then there's that connecting mass in the middle. Anyways, the purpose of this building is it's going to be the epicenter of innovation in the Greater Bay Area, and it's going to be a mixed-use development with 360,000 square meters. That 3-dimensional trajectory that you saw is supposed to tie all public and private programs together within the structures, so that'll give accessibility on all levels. And what that connector is called is the Sky Bridge, and it's going to include a public cultural platform, a viewing deck, and it'll accommodate gardens, art installations, or even events. Last on our list today is the CCTV Headquarters. Yes, I saved the best for last, and anyone who's a fan of Rem Koolhaas probably was waiting for me to talk about this one. This place is in Beijing, China. It was completed back in 2012, and is by far one of the most unique pieces of architecture on the planet. They say in the description that this thing is aiming at an alternative to the exhausted typology of the skyscraper, and apparently this thing, which is no surprise, required a very long-term collaboration between the European and Chinese engineers, along of course with OMA. And I guess this headquarters actually facilitates a pretty good degree of public access to what's going on in the production of the Chinese media. You can take a public loop there, which takes visitors on a dedicated path through the building, and it shows the everyday studio work that happens inside. So there you have it. There's some of my favorite pieces of work from OMA and Rem Koolhaas, and you're probably catching on to what I said earlier, and that is that He has a very edgy style, but not every one of his buildings looks like the last. Along with over 100 buildings designed and countless lectures, Rem has also written dozens of books over his career, including titles like Elements of Architecture, Great Leap Forward, Size Matters, and Junk Space. What's interesting about Rem himself and the OMA brand is they really are trying to do so much more than just design buildings. Even looking back at one of his most famous projects at the Seattle Public Library, initial reports on that project said that Seattle was bracing for a wild ride with a man famous for staying outside of the bounds of convention. I just think that any opposition to Rem's work boils down to the fact that first, a lot of people just can't accept change, and also a lot of people just can't see into the future like Rem can in terms of how a building will interact with its local community and environment. Arc20 did a piece outlining 10 lessons that architects and designers can learn from Rem's work. First, of course, is to never compromise with your design. This advice is aimed at those architects who are chasing commissions and jobs versus really fulfilling projects. Next, he says to challenge conventions, and he's quoted here saying, "We are surrounded by crisis mongers who see the city in terms of decline. I kind of automatically embrace the change. Then I try to find ways in which change can be mobilized to strengthen the original identity. It's a weird combination of having faith and having no faith." He endorses that you go to competitions because in a competition you don't have a client, so there's no boundaries as far as what you can create. Presenting your thoughts to the world is another important one that he preaches, and this bit of wisdom is just saying that if you're going to put a unique design out there, make sure the community understands why it's unique. Be the master of your craft is next, which of course comes only with experience, but the idea here is you should not pursue something like being an architect unless you aim to master it. Be original is one of my personal favorites, especially when it's coming from an architect. I'm somebody who lives in a city full of desert-colored tract homes where every single house in the community looks exactly the same. Rem, of course, puts a lot of focus on spatial planning, which is just simply ensuring that all of the spaces within a building flow nicely together. Learn and develop internally is the next bit of advice that we can all apply to our lives regardless of our line of work. Rem is known to have been influenced heavily by his upbringing and being born into the tail end of the devastation of World War II. Being a visionary, of course, is a great starting point for any architect, designer, or artist. And last is acceptance, which in the architectural world just simply means that it's easy to have a concept or an idea, but what's really important is that it's possible to turn that idea into a reality. Nowadays, Rem Koolhaas is known as a starchitect, although he doesn't really accept that title himself.
He rejects the label starchitect and thinks the notion of a celebrity architect contradicts the profession.
What inspires me is the need of others.
The needs of others.
Yeah, an architect is a kind of very strange profession because you have an ability, but to be triggered, you need an impulse from another person or another party.
As Rem has gotten older and focused more on his work and society as a whole, he has kind of shifted his focus to look more at things like climate change and preservation and migration. And that concept is really showcased in an incredible way at the Guggenheim Museum in New York. This exhibit isn't there anymore, but what Rem was trying to do there is turn a spotlight on the 98% of the planet not yet occupied by cities. It was more art than it was architecture, and it was definitely more environmental and political, but apparently he did a really good job exploring the changes happening in the areas of the world that he calls the countryside. Looking back at the countryside exhibit, even at 77 years old, Rem Koolhaas was still very energetic and excited about that project, so something tells me that he still has a few tricks up his sleeve before he finally settles down and retires, but who am I kidding? He's probably never gonna settle down and retire. If you enjoyed the video today, guys, hit that thumbs up button down below before you go. It really helps my channel out a lot. That's all I've got for you this time. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, see ya.